Tonight, Israel lays siege on the Gaza Strip, retribution for the deadly attack by Hamas. Punishing airstrikes and choked supply lines at the border.
We are engaged right now in forceful deterrence
as Hamas threatens to execute hostages.
إذ نعلن عن هذا القرار.
Tragic tales of Canadians caught in the crisis.
I woke up to a phone call saying that he was gone, that he had left the party and was gunned down.
And a divisive debate on Canadian streets.
The Palestinian people are fighting for something very specific, which is freedom.
This is not a demonstration of love of anyone. This is a demonstration of hate.
Plus, an appeal for international help in the wake of a deadly earthquake.
There are people sitting there without shelter. They are afraid. They are scared.
Afghanistan struggles with a rising death toll and absence of global aid.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina. Reporting tonight, Heather Wright.
Good evening. Israel is stepping up on its vow for vengeance, calling up 300,000 reservists and ordering a complete siege of the Gaza Strip. Adding to the tension, a new threat from Hamas militants to kill hostages on camera if the attacks from Israel continue. Tonight, Gaza is under bombardment with many citizens caught in the crossfire. The wide-scale destruction in plain view at this refugee camp after an Israeli airstrike. Funerals are being held on both sides of the border as the death toll climbs past 1,500. CTV's Adrian Gabriel is in Israel tonight and starts us off.
Israel has intensified its airstrikes on Gaza, as promised, unleashing a total siege. Already access to food and fuel are being blocked, and electricity has been cut to millions living in the Gaza Strip. We took ourselves, children and grandchildren and ran away. We became refugees, this man said. From the air, Israel taking aim at Hamas targets, and even this refugee camp in the northern part of the Gaza Strip was struck.
The images of the devastation and destruction from the Hamas strongholds in Gaza are just the beginning. We have eliminated many hundreds of terrorists, and we will not stop there.
Hamas now threatening that with every airstrike on Gaza without prior warning will result in the execution of Israeli civilians who were rounded up and taken hostage. Jennifer Damtai's 22-year-old daughter is among the missing.
You can't sleep. All I can think about is where she is, if she's suffering, if she's still alive.
Damtai's daughter was last seen at a music festival near the Gaza border, though this man survived.
It's really living hell, and never seen anything like this. Bodies all places for the slaughter.
Israel's military says rescuing hostages is one of its top priorities, especially now that it's regained control over all of its southern territories.
We are fortifying the border and guarding it heavily to make sure that no additional terrorists will come in.
But with that change, disheartening discoveries. The bodies of 100 people were recovered today from a small farming town near the border that had been the scene of a hostage standoff. And there are fears the conflict may be growing more intense at the border Israel shares with Lebanon, where at least 3 members of Hezbollah, the Iran-backed Lebanese militant group, were killed by Israeli shelling.
The United Nations calling for calm and for de-escalation. They're concerned that the growing threat here in the region could lead to a larger one across the world. Heather?
Adrian, you are in Tel Aviv tonight. What's happening there, and what sense are you getting on the ground?
The streets tonight here in Tel Aviv are silent, and they have been for days. This is usually a city that's humming with activity. Now, early this morning at Ben Gurion Airport, a missile was fired there nearby by Hamas. They claim that they were targeting the airport. That's where we landed tonight. Our flight was only about a quarter full, but when it touched down, all of the Israelis on board began to applaud in unison. Even during a time of war, they were desperate to come home.
All right, Adrian Gobriel in Tel Aviv tonight. Thanks, Adrian. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau condemned the attacks, calling them brutal and horrific, and called out those celebrating the violence.
The glorification of death and violence and terror has no place anywhere, including and especially here in Canada. So let me be very clear. Hamas terrorists aren't a resistance. They're not freedom fighters. They are terrorists.
Trudeau also reiterated Canada's support for Israel and its right to defend itself. There are more than 1,900 Canadians registered in Israel and the occupied territories, and many families are still trying to find out who is safe, who is missing, and who might be a hostage. CTV's Jill Makishon reports on the anguish and the agonizing wait for answers.
In the Israel desert at a music festival filled with thousands, the horror of the Hamas attack initially unfolded through frantic images and phone calls. That was true for the family of Montreal's Alexandra Look as well.
He was FaceTiming his mom, then they lost the connection.
The 33-year-old Canadian, first believed to be among the missing, is now identified as one of the 260 dead here.
I posted everywhere I can on social media. Maybe he was kidnapped, maybe he was injured, maybe he died. No one really knew.
You'd heard he'd been shot and killed?
Yeah.
Alex Look, a man with an intense love of life, is said to have lost his trying to save others. On social media, family said he left as a hero, wanting to protect the people he was with. His father wrote, Alex was a force of nature endowed with a unique charisma and unparalleled generosity. Another Canadian, Vancouver's Ben Mizrahi, also believed to have been at that music festival, is still missing. Friends say his phone is showing a location in that area, but Mizrahi hasn't been found. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, speaking on CTV's Power Play, confirmed there is a growing number of missing Canadians.
So we've received reports of 1 Canadian dead and also 3 missing.
In the face of threats by Hamas to kill hostages, families are facing their worst fears. 75-year-old Vivian Silver, a Canadian-Israeli peace activist, was captured from her home near the Gaza border.
You hope that somebody with the kind of great intentions that she has will be able to deal with the situation and come back safe and sound.
Ottawa is calling for the immediate release of hostages, demanding they be treated in accordance with international law. Heather.
Jill Makishon in Winnipeg tonight. Thank you, Jill. There were demonstrations across the country today, Canadians speaking out on the escalating bloodshed in the Middle East. Late tonight in Toronto, a heavy police presence as Jewish groups rallied in support of Israel and denounced pro-Hamas rallies where some praised the gruesome attacks against civilians.
There are those who celebrate murder and terrorism. And there is a Jewish community and allies who celebrate life and human dignity.
Viva, viva Intifada! Viva, viva Intifada!
An opposing rally earlier today saw hundreds of pro-Palestinian demonstrators spill onto Toronto streets, outraged about how they're treated in the occupied territories.
I don't support killing civilians, but I support resistance.
Dozens also gathered in Halifax.
Israel supports human life, and we want to make sure that our people, both Palestinians and Israelis, live in peace together.
And protesters in Calgary echoed calls for a peaceful resolution. Tonight, U.S. President Joe Biden confirmed 11 Americans have been killed in Israel, and is likely others are among those kidnapped by Hamas. Listed as a terrorist organization by many countries, including the U.S. and Canada, Hamas has controlled Gaza for more than 15 years, with innocent civilians once again caught in the crossfire. Here's CTV's Washington Bureau Chief, Joy Malbon.
In Gaza City, between the bombings, a brief moment of calm to bury the dead, including children. Home to more than 2 million Palestinians crammed into a strip of land 40 kilometers long. The death toll is now in the hundreds. Civilians caught in this war between Israel and Hamas with no place to go. Come aid the people of Gaza. Help us, this woman cries. Israel and Egypt have maintained a blockade on Gaza since 2007 when Hamas seized power, a blockade that has crippled the economy and caused increasing poverty for those who live here. Hamas is the ruling power inside Gaza. The Islamic militant movement has sworn to destroy Israel, responsible for suicide attacks on Israeli citizens. Designated a terrorist group by Canada, the U.S., the European Union, Egypt, and Japan, the barbarity of these recent attacks and the latest threat to execute hostages as Israel's prime minister comparing Hamas to ISIS.
Now the whole world knows Hamas is the ISIS, and we will beat it just like the Western world has beaten ISIS.
That Hamas attacked Israel with such sophistication by land, sea, and air has Washington all but pointing the finger at Iran.
Iran is broadly complicit in these attacks for having supported Hamas going back decades, for having provided financial support, for having provided training, for having provided weapons to Hamas.
Washington is sending additional warships and fighter jets already en route to Israel as President Joe Biden prepares to address the nation tomorrow afternoon. Heather?
Joy Malbin in Washington tonight. Thanks, Joy. Joining us now is retired Major General David Fraser, CTV military analyst and former commander of NATO forces in southern Afghanistan. Major General, Israel has now ordered a full siege of Gaza. Hamas has threatened to execute hostages anytime an airstrike hits Gazans in their home. The rules of war here seem to be gone. Is a peaceful resolution possible, and what needs to happen to prevent a full-fledged regional conflict?
Well, Heather, there is no peaceful resolution in the short term. This is going to be a bloody war. Hamas abides by no rules of law, no law of armed conflict. Israel, on the other hand, tends to do so. But because of the change in the scope of the Hamas playbook here, we should, quite frankly, be looking for no rules on this fight. It's going to be a bloody fight until the end.
The world's attention right now is on this conflict. Countries are mobilizing aid and military support. But I want to ask you, what might this mean for the war in Ukraine, especially given waning support from some in the United States?
The waning support from the United States and the rest of the world, quite frankly, has been accelerated because Hamas has turned the channel. Everybody's going to flip off of Ukraine and going to go back onto Israel and Hamas. United States is going to go directly to the biggest partner they have, which is the Israelis. This is bad news for Ukraine, good news for Putin, bad news for Hamas and the other players, because now the United States is going to be fully behind this, and this war has the great potential of becoming more than just the region, but expand into other regions, including Lebanon, the West Bank, and other countries.
All right, Major General David Fraser, we appreciate your insight tonight. The World Health Organization says a global response to aid Afghanistan has been slow after a devastating earthquake killed at least 2,000 people and injured another 2,000.
We are expecting more deterioration, not just in health, but in other aspects that will definitely impact the health of the Afghans, limiting the services.
The WHO says the world's attention has been diverted to the Middle East, and many governments are also weary of dealing directly with the Taliban government. Coming up, breaking his silence.
My reputation so far is ruined.
A Toronto investor cries foul over what he calls unfair allegations of Chinese political interference. For months, allegations of foreign interference have swirled around the founders of Wealth One Bank. Shenglin Xian was once celebrated as an immigrant success story. Now he can't even open a bank account. In an exclusive interview with CTV News, Xian breaks his silence about an unreported investigation that could clear his name. Here's CTV's Judy Trin.
Shenglin Xian moved to Canada 33 years ago with his wife and daughter. Their first home was an unheated garage. His first job was selling bicycles. Then he sold insurance and used those connections to start a bank.
I came across more and more new immigrants from all different places of the world, and they need to do business.
Wealth One Bank of Canada.
Wealth One was founded in 2016 and caters to Chinese Canadians. The bank has assets of more than $400 million. Last December, the finance minister raised concerns that Shen and two other primary shareholders could be susceptible to foreign interference and money laundering. The confidential information was leaked to media.
My reputation so far is ruined.
Shen says he cooperated with two audits and provided investigators with approximately 4,000 documents, including information about his family in China, bank transactions, and political donations.
Shenling was an open book, and they went in there and they dug, and they dug and they dug. And when all is said and done, they weren't able to find anything.
CTV News was able to obtain the financial audits. The first by Bordner Lanner Gervais did not identify any basis in fact to suggest the bank has a vulnerability towards coercion or compulsion by the Chinese Communist Party. The second audit by accounting firm PwC did not identify indications that the shareholders concealed information from anti-money laundering controls. The findings of these February audits weren't enough, and in April, Chrystia Freeland ordered Shen to divest his 32% ownership in the company.
He won't answer even whether his party received illegal money.
The allegations against Shen surfaced while the government was facing a daily barrage of criticism that it wasn't doing enough to counter Chinese interference. In her order, Freeland said your continued ownership of the shares would be contrary to public interest as it would pose risks to the bank and the broader financial system.
It is pretty remarkable. I've never seen it before on national security grounds, and it does suggest that there is some sort of secret intelligence.
Freeland has also imposed additional conditions on Wealth One to protect it from alleged interference. The company is banned from using the Chinese social media app WeChat. It must scan its network for unauthorized data sharing and sweep for surveillance devices. Shen says after the media reports, no one will take his money.
I donate to a hospital, they reject me. I apply for a credit card, they reject me.
And one has to ask oneself, is this discrimination and racism? It's a valid question.
Shen says he will fight the ministerial order to divest his shares, but he's not disclosing what legal action he's considering. Judy Trin, CTV News, Ottawa.
And in a brief statement, Chrystia Freeland's office says she takes her responsibility for the security and stability of the Canadian financial sector seriously, adding, as Minister of Finance, she is empowered to act to address risks to any bank in Canada and risks posed to the Canadian financial sector. Freeland has declined to make any further comments. Still ahead, repelling the rain.
We need to be prepared.
Cities look for ways to climate-proof the concrete jungle. From green tops in Toronto to rain defenses in Vancouver, more Canadian cities are aiming to be more climate conscious. Montreal is one of them. CTV's Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin explains.
In busy downtown Montreal lies an oasis. A gas station stood for decades on this street corner. Now there's a so-called sponge park. The types of soil and plants were chosen here to absorb rainwater and avoid damaging floods like the one caused by a torrential downpour in July. Montreal now has 7 of those parks. It just announced 30 more. Invest to also add hundreds of sponge sidewalks, essentially extensions of the curb where vegetation can be planted. It's all part of the city's defense system against the impacts of climate change.
It's gonna hit Montreal more and more often for a long period of time also. So we need to be prepared.
In our current concrete jungles, water often pools and overwhelms sewer systems.
We build buildings, roads, parking lots. We're basically sealing the surface.
Those are some of the measures 1,500 leaders in climate change adaptation discussed at a recent conference in Montreal, comparing notes on best practices.
You have to act on the surface. You have to find ways that water infiltrates elsewhere than in the sewer system that is unable to cope with those new thunderstorms.
The parks and sidewalks are only part of the solution, and the price tag is high. But climate change experts argue the cost of repairing damage from flood after flood is higher. The Canadian Climate Institute estimates that for every dollar spent on mitigation measures, about $13 to $15 can be saved down the road. But of course, this is much more than a mitigation measure.
These technologies provide a lot of benefits. So it's not just flooding, it's air quality improvement, it's urban heat island effect, access to green spaces.
And it's clear many enjoy this haven. Geneviève Beauchemin, CTV News, Montreal.
After the break, fulfilling a dream. A Vancouver mother turns her walks into a best-selling book. A BC mother's quest to overcome her fears and obstacles has led her to uncover a hidden talent. CTV's Adam Sawatsky explains.
In the beginning, the breakwater near her home simply inspired Jean Paitko to take pictures.
And it's kind of like my meditation.
Capturing sunrises and sunsets until they captured her imagination in an unexpected way.
I thought, well, what a beautiful place. Why not, set a murder here?
You see, ever since Jean was 16 years old, she'd wanted to write a mystery novel, but lacked the confidence to pursue it.
I did everything but admit that writing was my calling.
Although the prospect of pursuing that dream at 53, when you're balancing a full-time job with being a single mom of two, seemed impossible, it also felt imperative.
There was something about having kids, and you just realize what matters.
So one morning after her walk, Jean sat down at her kitchen table and committed to face her fear.
And I didn't even try to plan out the novel. I just said, let's write a chapter.
So Jean started writing about the sun setting and a woman discovering a body by the breakwater.
I really want a single mom to solve a crime while she's on the way to drop her kids off to school.
Over the next 6 months, Jean considered her complex plot while walking, wrote chapters before her kids were waking, and eventually solved her fictional crime in a way that felt satisfying.
I did it, and I was scared because now someone else had to read it.
But after sending the novel to half a dozen publishers and agents, Jean says she felt invisible.
I didn't hear a thing back. I didn't even get a reply.
But Jean refused to give up, took the risk of self-publishing, and will never forget the feeling of seeing her photo on the cover of Blood on the Breakwater.
It was spectacular. It's like I grew a new heart.
But nothing could prepare Jean for the feeling of selling out at her local market, which led to becoming a bestseller at her local bookstore before earning #1 on Amazon's national sales chart.
I wrote this book between 5 and 6 in the morning before making school lunches.
Never imagining she was also making a dream come true.
And now it's, a bestseller.
And while Jean wishes she could go back and tell that 16-year-old to believe in herself, she can show her own kids what happens when you never give up on yourself.
And if it happens when you're 53, it still feels absolutely marvelous.
Adam Sawatsky, CTV News, Victoria.
And that's it for us tonight. I'm Heather Wright for Omar and all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching. Hope you had a safe and happy Thanksgiving. Good night.